You know, they always tell you, I don't care what media publication you listen to, I don't care what newspaper you read, they always tell you about violence in the city. Unrest in the city. And shockingly, it's true. But violence isn't just housed in one particular community or jurisdiction. In America, at least. It spreads far and wide. So we don't hear too much about violence in rural communities, in suburbs, exurbs. But I guarantee you, gun violence in those communities, it's through the roof as well. So there's this almost purposeful need to look at our cities with a critical lens, but never any other communities or jurisdictions. You all, I want to open with that being our premise for this larger concept of there being a war in our cities. You hear about that concept all the time. There's a war on the streets. You've heard about gang violence forever. It used to be in Compton, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago. And they still talk about gun violence in the cities. And it's tragic anyone who loses their lives to gun violence. That's tragic. But the number of unsafe gun deaths that happen in rural and suburban America, do you all know it just about is equal to the gun violence in the cities? Yes. Every day across America, a lot of people lose their life to suicide using guns as their preferred method. That doesn't get constituted or talked about as much on the media. We only hear the gun violence in the city. And to me, you all, that's a war in the cities. But it's also a war on the cities. So the media is part of this campaign. A campaign to criticize our cities. Demonize the cities. And in essence, say that we're all kind of seedy criminals in the city. If all you do is talk about the crime that happens in the city, a common person who turns on or reads any publication or picks up any newspaper is going to think that only criminals live in the city. Now, we all know this isn't the case. And we all know that in large part, cities actually tend to be safer. Yes, if you talk about per capita gun violence, doesn't always have to be in terms of loss of life either. If you talk about gun violence per capita, per person, then we actually see a lot more gun violence outside of cities than we do inside of cities. Because sometimes they'll report to you that a gun violence incident happened in Nashville. And it might not be within the city limits. It could be a township or a suburb of Nashville. They'll just generalize it because most people know where Nashville is. And if it's in close proximity, even better. Give you a case in point. They said that individual who recently had a school shooting in Detroit, they said it happened in Detroit. And you all, it didn't happen in Detroit. It was in a township about 14 or 15 miles outside of the city limits. But because the media knows that people know where Detroit is, and it's in close proximity, they report that as it happening in Detroit. So there's this narrative always present in American society that our cities are dangerous. Gun violence. And there is violence in the city. But there's not too much honesty as to why the violence occurs in the city. Because if we were being completely honest, we would have to say that there's violence being done to the inhabitants of the city. Oftentimes, in large metropolitan cities, the citizens who live in the city are starved of resources. Now you say, wait a minute. Funding comes to every state. And it would stand to reason that if funding by the billions comes to a state, that the money is going to be in large part distributed to where the most people per capita live, right? Yes. In theory, it's supposed to work like that. But in practice, Americans, it hasn't been working like that. Quite the contrary. The federal government, let's use an example. They decide to give Mississippi $2 billion for fiscal year 2020. I'm making up these numbers. They're arbitrary. We're just saying the government, our taxpayer dollars, all of us, we give Mississippi $2 billion. It goes to the state. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because depending on who runs your legislature in your state, they divvy up and appropriate where that $2 billion is going to go throughout your state. The federal government can't earmark specifically where money goes when it's sent to the state. Your state decides this practice. Now, Here's what's been happening in Jackson, Mississippi. Because we're talking about a war in the cities and a war on the cities. Mississippi has been given a lot of money. But somehow, you all, Jackson, the largest city, the capital city in Mississippi, somehow their capital city has been neglected. Now, full stop. First off, you have to think, how is it not the case that the folks who live in the capital city of your state are not thriving the most in your state? How is it the place where all the revenue is generated, which in large part is Jackson, Mississippi? They have the airport. They have all the hospitals. How is it the people in the place where the most revenue is are struggling the most? I'm not saying that everyone in Mississippi is not struggling. They are. But if you go to certain communities outside of Jackson, not too far, suburbs, they're really affluent. They're doing really well. But I guarantee you, it stands to be the case that they all, not everyone, but a lot of them, are working state jobs, are working city jobs, are working private jobs in the city of Jackson, whilst the residents are struggling who actually live in the city. So what this is, you all, there's only one way to define it. It's parasitic in nature. It's something that latches onto you, the thing with the most vitality, and sucks out your vitality in order to feed itself. This process has been happening in our American cities for hundreds of years. But nobody really ever talks about it. It's a hidden war on our cities. Now, we're told in the media that there's a homeless crisis in our cities. The West Coast, we know it all too well. Portland, Seattle, Denver, Los Angeles, San Jose, San Francisco, you name it. You go through our big cities and you see unhoused people everywhere. Why is that, you all? They reside in the city. Why are they struggling so much? And the folks who live outside the city, they're doing so well. But our city folks, we're not doing so well. Well, it's because they take our resources. And they hoard them and take them to where they live, not in the city. They're sucking us dry in the city. That giant sucking sound you hear, it's folks driving their Ford F-150s, their monster trucks, into our city, taking our resources, our wealth, and bringing it back to Bellevue, bringing it back to Vallejo, bringing it back outside of our cities, everywhere. This is not just a one city problem issue. This happens in all of our cities. Our cities are drained by people who don't contribute to our cities. You know, they say they spend a lot of money in the cities. But is that money spent on the residents, per se, in the city? It could be sent as an earmark to a business. How many businesses actually hire residents who live in the city? Like, private. Because there's more private businesses than public or governmental businesses. How many private businesses only say we hire people who live within our city limits? No, they don't say that. Now that could be a form of discrimination. This is true. But it's also a form of discrimination to not take our city people and take people outside of our city and have those resources be removed from our city. Now you're discriminating against the city. People love to hate on the city. Outside of 9 to 5 though. Because during 9 to 5 they're in the city. Making money that they're going to quickly take out once they're done. This is an American pastime and practice as old as apple pie. But just because we practice something doesn't necessarily mean it's a good practice. And now we can all see the detrimental effects of it. People say the cities are not as great as they used to be anymore. Well, when there was income in the city, when people did have jobs in the city, a lot of folks decided they wanted to leave the city because they didn't want diversity. They didn't want to live around people of color. So they created suburbs. That was a new invention, you all. Within a lot of folks' lifetimes, they saw suburbs, freeways, byways, highways constructed. This is a 50-year-ago thing. Because people didn't want to live around other people, other Americans. So those constructs, you all, were conduits. They were conduits to drain our cities. So when you see that, you have to see it as what it is. A pipe weaved around our wonderful, beautiful cities. The take was ours. and transported somewhere far away. People want to understand mental health. But when you operate in insidious and devious ways for so long, it's going to cause instability in any system. This war on the cities is a war against Americans. Just because a lot of people have disdain for the folks who live in cities doesn't mean it's not going to hurt your country. Now they say the cities are so dangerous. Well, you starve them to death. If you starve anything to death, is it going to be happy starving to death? What are we doing here? What type of logic are we on, Americans? My hypothesis is they're starving the cities to death. All of us, all the cities, West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, South, they're starving us. They want to starve us out in the cities. Now, you've got to begin if you think I'm going to starve, or let my city folks starve. Look, we've got some things planned, a lot of things. But I just want to tell you all, whatever we've got planned, citizens in the city, you should make noise about this starvation. At the very least, they should hear our stomachs moaning. You know, a lot of people can't afford food. A lot of people lost everything in '08, the recession. That impacted the cities. Apartment complexes. They lost a lot of money. People lost their homes. And there was never any real remedy for this. Which community did subprime lending hit the hardest? In which areas? So we know who's really being disproportionately impacted. People talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion now. Post George Floyd and COVID. But we still haven't seen anything in our cities. We're seeing the same practices maintained. More money thrown at the problem. Of course. But the practice of money received in one hand and taken by the state in the other hand, that's continued. And conservative state legislatures all across the South. Mississippi being the prime example. The federal government finally, after decades of demanding by the residents and the Jackson government, finally received $800 million to repair their water facility. This has been a problem since the 90s. There was one young woman who was interviewed in the 90s, and she said the water was under a boil order in the 90s. You all, that's almost 30 years later. that Jackson is finally getting its due. Now, what happens when predominantly African American communities and cities finally receive money that they're long overdue? It seems that Mississippi, the state, wants to come in, and they want to take that money elsewhere from Jackson. Now that it's been specifically earmarked for Jackson, they are proclaiming that crime is a huge issue in Jackson, Mississippi. This is an issue they're saying nationally as well. Crime in the cities. You tell them I told you to tell you that they starved out the cities. And people are hungry in the cities because of the theft from the suburbanites taking our resources. And you tell them that there's crime everywhere in America. You can't commit a crime against citizens and expect them to remain lawful against you as you're committing the crime. No. If you want law and order, enforce the laws and don't criminalize. This is simple. You know, Jackson, Mississippi, they're now getting a large sum of money, and the state wants to distribute it. Do you think they're going to give it to Jackson? Well, some people might say yes. Why wouldn't they? My question is, why hadn't they? Why did they wait till the federal government sent Jackson $800 million? The crime statistics have largely stayed the same. This I want you all to know. So their excuse for SB 1020, it's not making too much sense. Because we looked at the crime statistics. They've been relatively on par with the rest of the country. Nothing outside of it. Absolutely not. And then, you all, why didn't they give them money, the state, to repair their water facility? Is not Jackson a part of Mississippi? It's their capital, for goodness sake. Now, all of a sudden, they want to expand the Capitol Police's perimeters? Why now? Now that there's been a large infusion of money. They want to spend it on things they prioritize. And Jackson, the residents of Jackson, you're not something they prioritize. So they're going to come up with all different types of things that they need the $800 million on to protect you from you, apparently. Because they're taking the money from one end of Jackson to the other. A small little community. And wouldn't you know, people who claim to not be racist, the community they're taking the money to is majority white. And the community they're taking the money away from is majority black. Also, it kind of sounds like the Brett Favre thing. If they tried to legislate it. What do I mean? Brett Favre was supposed to give speeches to benefit welfare recipients. He's a Mississippian. And, you know, he's a multi-millionaire. star Hall of Fame quarterback. He's doing something noble, giving speeches to benefit welfare recipients. Now they paid him the money, and he's supposed to give the speeches to benefit the welfare recipients of Mississippi. Do you all know he never gave the speeches? He just took the money and ran. Come to find out, he wanted to use the welfare recipient money to build a sports stadium where his daughter went to high school. They wanted to expand the athletic field. They wanted to do some new renovations. And the money that was supposed to go to the poorest Mississippians was diverted to an inanimate object that wasn't going to feed anyone. It wasn't going to help anyone be able to buy baby formula when there was a shortage. No, it was going to erect a new goalpost, a new scoreboard, and a volleyball center. That was more important than the poor Mississippians who have languished in economic poverty since the inception of that state. A sports stadium was more important. So do you think a state with someone like Brett Favre doing shit like that to his own Mississippians? On a side note, this is why I say it's un-American. You think about Brett Favre, a star millionaire quarterback. You know, everybody wants to blame the government. It's the government's fault. It's the government's fault. What about some of our shitty ass citizens? When are we going to put some blame on them? You know, in all of those years, Brett Favre made millions of dollars. He could have cut a check. It might not have cost the whole project, but it could have gone a long way. He knew about the drinking water in Jackson. People knew about that in the 90s. He was a star quarterback. Do you think he ever sent a penny to Jackson to help out the residents? Folks who put King LeBron James, as he calls himself, in their mouth negatively, like Candace Owens, and question why he's an outspoken critic of systemic racism. Well, he gives back to his community. He does. Brett Favre, in a small state like Mississippi, in a city like Jackson, had he ever given back to the Jackson residents after he made it, he'd be considered a hero. Ask yourself this, you all. For people who say they're patriotic and care about their country, how do you not care about the citizens that live in your country? Wouldn't that have made him a proud Mississippian to see Jackson city residents do well? Then you can have pride in Mississippi. Then you can have pride in the South. Then you can have pride in your country. But don't give me all that blah, blah, blah and bullshit about pride in your country when you don't give a damn about your citizens. And he didn't have to wait on any government to do it. So take some damn responsibility. The citizens have to take responsibility too. It's we the people. And what's the old Spider-Man quote? With great power comes great responsibility. And you see, I heard he was suing for defamation. We did a whole video about that. Governors involved, state administrators involved. You really think that type of corruption and system is going to give a rat's ass about Jackson? To say now that you've received what you've been protesting and demanding, not by us, of course, by the dreaded federal government that they love to talk badly about in Mississippi. But the state, they talk about states' rights. Jackson, you should kick some dirt on that shit real quick and say states' rights my ass. You don't care about the entire state. Say white rights only. Because all you care about is the suburbs outside of Jackson. Now they care about the crime in Jackson. Now that Jackson has some money. And you all, before you say this is just a one-off thing, go to Mason, Tennessee. As soon as the small, neglected community of Mason, Tennessee, predominantly black American, was told that a car manufacturing plant was going to be built, all of a sudden, Mason's finances became an issue. Now, Mason's finances have been an issue for a long period of time. Just like I told you all, Jackson crime has largely remained the same on par with the rest of the nation. But all of a sudden, they wanted to appoint a state auditor over Mason, Tennessee's books. As soon as they smelt some money coming, they want to come in and take it. This has been a process that's been happening in our cities. Predominantly cities of color that are diverse. But we have it happening on the West Coast too. Even in big metropolitan cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. This occurs, you all. I want you to know this. This war on the cities, it's a national war. And that's why I said the cities should fight back. Get what's ours. We should hop the gun, so to speak. Because it looks like the federal government is not going to act on a national reparations. So the cities should take care of it themselves. We're bleeding, we should put on our own bandages. That was my thinking. And it still is, in large part, you all. But we need this to be done nationally, too. We need the federal government to stop pussyfooting with racism in America. What Mississippi is going to do with SB 1020 is nothing more than the government handing the people who need the money and them finally receiving it after 30-something odd years of protesting, fighting for, demanding from the state to no avail. This is putting the money in their hand to fix their problems. And the state coming in and saying, no, you don't get the money, we do. We control you. You see, they're talking about appointing prosecutors and judges, not electing, appointing. And nobody of color is going to be doing the appointing. In a majority, the largest per capita city of Black Americans in the country. Some people who I've spoken to said this is reminiscent of the beginning of apartheid in America. We did have Jim Crow laws, and now it just seems like they're going to create for themselves a complete opposite shadow legislative jurisdiction to operate without the consent of the citizens who actually even live in the city. Predicated on violence in the city. This is the total stripping of cities' rights to govern their citizenry. Now, ask yourself, what if cities tried to do this with townships that make money off the city but don't contribute? What if they said, wait a minute, we're going to create our own separate jurisdiction in your townships. You're no longer going to elect your judges. We're going to have the city appoint your judges, your prosecutors, your local elected officials eventually. Because you know, if you have a shadow judiciary, they can say that you have no constitutional rights to any elections. We're going to appoint your mayor, your city council. It's the complete Orwellian seizure of your rights to duly elect your public officials. This must not stand. And they think we're not paying attention to this. But the reason this is so important, this particular war on the cities, because it'll be a model for how they use their seizure in other cities. Look, I said before, the cities have to unite, and we have to get ready. This is probably it for us. We all know this. But we're not going to let them starve us out. Quietly, calm, and peaceful. No. So some of us have been planning what we're going to do for a long period of time. Years and years and years. We knew they might try to starve us out eventually. And that's what it's increasingly looking like, you all. I'm going to be honest. They're trying to starve us out. They're ramping it up. Now, we're going to have to make some noise as a citizen. Each of us can choose to do what we want as citizens. In parameters of this, please don't ask or make requests to remain peaceful. When you're trying to starve out someone, general question here, when you're trying to starve out someone or a group, is that a peaceful practice? So you all as citizens, you choose to do what you need to do to rectify this situation. Because, oh my goodness, it definitely needs to be rectified. This has been going on for too damn long. And everybody knows it. But apparently, very few want to say it. I have no problem saying it. People are angry everywhere. But they're certainly angry in the cities. They don't know what this is. Who did this to them? And Americans are largely trying to point the finger. Play games of distraction. Ooh. China, Russia, Iran, India, Pakistan, North Korea, you name it. None of them prevented us from fixing Jackson's water facility for 30 years. That was done by racist, conservative Mississippians towards their fellow citizens who live in Jackson. So this whole game of distraction while they're trying to starve us, that's not going to work this time. We're super focused and we're going to get what's rightfully ours. Look, I'm not saying the city should get everything and the suburbs should get nothing. That's how they've been operating. Take everything from the city and redistribute it to the suburbs, exurbs, and rural communities. And the reason why everybody's starting to hurt now is because you can't drain anything from the cities anymore. There's nothing left to drain. People are upset. Nobody wants to work. No. Working doesn't get you anything besides staying in poverty. We see it in the cities. Our people work, are innovative and creative every day. And they have nothing. So this notion of work, no. We're not falling for that gambit either. We want what's ours. We'll talk prices at a later time. Because figures are not as important as action. And I think a lot of people don't need a figure. You know, sometimes we get hung up on this too. They'll say, what do you want? No. It's not what I want. What do you want for your own fellow citizens? Your own fellow Americans? Who you've so long neglected? What figure do you think is appropriate? We'll start from that vantage point. And if your figure is something really insulting, embarrassing, we'll start the negotiation. Look, while America is not investing, others are. So be mindful of that, Americans. Even people who are exploiting the cities are being exploited globally. You see, when you starve out your own productivity, your own vital resources, something bigger can starve you out as a nation. I just read the other day that the nation of Russia decided to pay the continent of Africa $20 billion for giving all American debt owed by African nations. This is monumental. People are investing. They say talk is cheap and to put your money where your mouth is. We better start investing in our own citizens, in our own cities, in our own countries. Or else none of us are going to have anything. I don't think people understand this. If the cities contract and starve, everybody is going to contract and starve. You're seeing craziness in the suburbs like you've never seen before. Everybody is feeling this economic pinch. I ask Americans that are thoughtful, if the dominant group, which is white Americans, are feeling hardship, what do you think black Americans are feeling? A lot of people have solutions. We should listen to the experts that are offering solutions. We've shared what those credible solutions are. Some of those things are being done. But you're having resistance in certain conservative states. And this is where involvement is really going to be the word of the decade. I encourage you all to get involved. It doesn't have to be politically. No, not at all. You deciding that you want to go down to your city council and you want to have a meeting or coffee with your state senator to share what you're going through in their district, that's involvement. You deciding that you want to fight for proportional representation. You know, the reason why there's a supermajority to begin with in Mississippi is because they compact these districts. They put all of the people who are of one ethnicity in one or two districts and disperse everyone else. So you have a supermajority because of rigging of the process to begin with. You can decide to use that as your issue of advocacy. And maybe take a legal parameter. Because we don't know if that's constitutional or not. I mean, just recently, in South Carolina, the 1st Congressional District, they had removed From 2018 to 2020, they had removed 30,000 African American voters from the district. And one citizen in that community, in that district, decided that this was illegal, what they were doing. And she got the judge to agree with her. A federal judge said that those residents who were removed from 2018 to 2020 had to be restored to that district for the 2024 election. So this is how a politician can go from barely winning a district to 2 years later winning the district by 18 percentage points. You just cut and carve out the black people who you know aren't going to vote Republican. This is what's been happening in our cities. These kind of cruel games that conservative politicians are playing. They tell you about the war in the cities, on the streets. But they're waging a hidden war on the cities from their seats in government. And we as city residents have to start removing them. Through all means, involvement. Involvement could mean that you become a podcaster and you talk about what's happening in your neighborhood. You don't have to ever mention a politician. What's happening on your street in Jackson? We want to know. A lot of Americans want to know. There's a thirst for information, legitimate information. Because what we see is manufactured and misinformation. What are the Jackson residents going to spill the beans about? Mississippi. What are they going to say when the folks come asking questions, as they used to say? Are they going to say everything's been sweet in Mississippi? Well, we know about the history, the lynchings, the KKK. We know that, but they claim that they are beyond it. Recently, the Raskin County Sheriff, their department is under DOJ investigation. Did you all hear this? You know, you heard about the kidnapped Americans in Mexico and how 2 of them tragically died. Have you heard about what the Raskin County Sheriff Department has been doing to its own citizens? Raskin County is part of Jackson, but it's largely white majority. And people to this day in Mississippi say don't go there. They're racist. They say they still will lynch black Americans, Latino Americans, Chinese Americans, till present day. This is what we're talking about in Mississippi. It's a nefarious and atrocious halo hanging over that state, and people know it. There's been this war from our cities. Our cities are just now waking up to it. As conservatives would say, they're woke to the war. Now they say there's a culture war they're fighting. No drag shows. Well, They're not in your community by and large. They're generally in a bigger city. And you don't have to pay to go. It's kind of like strip clubs. Who's outside saying, don't put a strip club in my community? No one. You kind of don't have to spend your money. So this is the distraction. These nonsensical culture wars that they say are attacking traditional values. Which ones? I can name you the traditional values you've attacked in the city. Redlining, gentrification, freeways, byways, highways. Hiring practices. These are all attacks against our city. And the residents and the community in the city have weathered all of these storms. But weathering a storm can leave you damaged and tattered, broken, and depleted. And that's where our cities are now. They're broken and depleted, starved of resources, purposefully. And this was done systemically for racist purposes. You know, don't take my word for it. Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Citibank, JP Morgan, Chase, one of them, a bunch of them, got together and said racism has cost America $16 trillion. That's their calculation. The big banks, the big boys, Goldman Sachs, 16 trillion. Now it's probably double or triple that. But how much potential has been lost in the cities? Because of exploitation, extraction, neglect, and racism. And people want to talk about the problems in the city. But they don't want to be honest about what caused the problems in the city. They say it looks run down. I wonder who might have run it down. Who might have drained it? You in your big mansion in the suburb? With your big private school? With your 4 cars in your garage? Did you have any situation in draining the resources of the city? What did you know and when did you know it? What do you think Jackson residents are going to say? We know Brett Favre never cut them a check. We know that money that was supposed to go to welfare recipients were stolen for construction of a new stadium, volleyball arena, and not to feed the most food insecure people in our country. You know, I don't know the percentage of Mississippians on food assistance, EBT as they call it. But I would imagine it's an astronomical amount. And you think about a state that would thief money for food. I tell this story a lot. A a woman reached out to me when I was campaigning for Gary Chambers in Louisiana. And this is where I got the refrigerator challenge from. She said, I have nothing but butter, a half-eaten box of cereal. That's all the food, and I have 4 children. She said, I'm going to vote for Gary Chambers because nobody else gives a damn. And at least he does care. They know it's been this bad, and they've done nothing. And what they want to do is dazzle you with nonsense. Bigotry and hatred is nonsense. They want to take a tiny, less than 1 fraction of a percentage point of people in the South, and they want to vilify them at the expense and neglect of not doing anything for impoverished Black Americans in the entirety of Mississippi's history. This is what they want to do. Expand the Capitol Police. You know, the Capitol Police, they said, have had like 6 incidents where multiple citizens have died in something like 6 months. It was some crazy figure. And they're like, there's violence. I'm like, run the data. It seems like all the violence is coming from the Capitol Police. That's a high rate of violent incidents occurring in a short time span. Jalen Lewis lost his life. Shot in his vehicle. No weapon. Just shot by a Capitol Police officer to death. Folks in Mississippi are rightfully angry. They're seeing Derek Chauvin-like practices and worse being done to them. In Raskin County, the sheriffs are putting guns in people's mouths, pulling triggers and shooting them, killing them. Now, what is the Mississippi legislator doing about this violence in Mississippi? This criminality being done by law enforcement agents, multiple departments. Are they holding any special sessions to investigate? Has the governor declared any type of emergency in regards to police accountability? Or if it was one officer, maybe. But the whole department in Raskin is under investigation. The Capitol Police in Jackson have had 6 incidents resulting in multiple deaths. Where's the accountability in response to the criminality that they claim they're coming in to course correct? So we know this is a lie. And there's no reason city residents who have experienced so much trauma in Jackson, Mississippi, would believe anything any law enforcement agency in that state would say. On May 15, 1970, Mississippi State Highway Patrol officers along with state police, opened fire on Jackson State University, Alexander Hall. 460 rounds of munition, murdering a high school student and a college student. And they claim that this was done due to a potential sniper on the 5th floor of the university. Now we know dining halls generally are not on the 5th floor. So ask yourself, you all, even if that story was accurate, why aim for the ground floor, which is where Alexander Hall, the dining hall, is? Why not aim upward if you suspect a sniper? Mississippi has operated as a criminal enterprise from inception. Now they want to talk about criminality. And they're still operating in a criminal manner. Murdering citizens without due process is a crime. Everyone is afforded innocence under proven guilty by a jury of their peers. So why wasn't Jalen Lewis afforded that? No. Jackson is the beginning. It's always been the beginning. Jackson was paramount. Prior to, during, and after the Civil War. And Jackson again is paramount. It's the epicenter of really this belly of atrocities this country wants to hide and bury. You know, take your students on a field trip if you're in Florida. Take them to Jackson, Mississippi. It's the Bible Belt. It's not weird like Seattle and Portland. That's us weirdos out here. Take them to a Christian state like Mississippi. And let them talk with Christian Americans who live in Jackson. And ask them how their white Christian brethren has treated their black Christian brethren in Mississippi. This has nothing to do with critical race theory. Let's see what responses the kids will get. It's not this big scary thing. It's not like it's a woke monster. It's just a field trip. Yeah, they should take all of the kids from Florida to Jackson, Mississippi. They can tour the water facility that hasn't been funded for nearly 3 decades until very recently. They can ask the residents, what was it like to drink contaminated water and boil water for 30, 40 years because of neglect? Yeah, this has nothing to do with 1619. This was 1990. There's been this war on our cities. It's un-American because you can't say you love America and have a disdain for so many millions of your citizens. It makes no sense. None whatsoever. We need to see Jackson do better, do well. We need to see all of Mississippi do better and do well. And it starts, you all, when people are honest. When folks are honest, that's when Mississippi is going to do good again. But this again will be for the first time. Because if you trace Mississippi's history, it's never done well. They'll say some people did well, but off of what? They'll never finish. Exploitation, dehumanization, and criminality. The same thing they're saying they're opposed to now. But that was great. Because that's what we hear when we say here, make America great again. We say win. Because on May 15th, 1970, they were shooting at university students. Law enforcement in Mississippi. Folks want to tell me about the Black Lives Matter protests and how violent they were. There's always been violence. Because when you try to starve out that's a violent practice. And people are prone often to respond violently. We're not going to let Jackson starve out. Not quietly. We're going to have to go down and make some noise. I postponed the address at Jackson State University out of respect for Rolling Forks. But we'll be there soon. We'll be there very soon.